welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, hi, I'm Katie, and today is September 1st, which means it's time to do my August wrap up. I cannot believe that it is already September. That's crazy. I really wish it would cool down because it's still 100 degrees in Texas, but hopefully it will get there soon. August was one of the best reading months I've had so far this year. I read so many books that I just absolutely loved so much. I cannot wait to talk about them. It was so good. Like I normally do, I'm going to talk about these in order of enjoyment. So I'm going to start with the one that I enjoyed the least, and then I'm going to go up to the ones that I enjoyed the most. And so I'm going to start with the one that was the only one that I actually actively disliked this month, which is Hard Times by Charles Dickens. This was my read it or unhaul it pick this for August from the books that I haven't read yet. I have a jar with a bunch of book titles in it, and I picked a couple out. And this was the one that I went with this month, and I did not love this one. It's so short, and I'm very, very glad. It's only about 250 pages, I think. Yeah, it's about 250 pages, and that was all that I could have handled for this one. I did end up finishing it. It is staying on my shelf for now, but I did not enjoy this one very much. I generally enjoy Dickens, but this one just was not it for me. I did not care much for the characters. I did not care much for the plot. It was kind of boring. And it was very political. There was a lot of social commentary in here, which is standard for Dickens, but I just felt like the story around it wasn't really enough to keep me engaged. So I didn't really care for this one. When I finished it, I gave it 3 stars, but the more that I'm thinking about it, I keep thinking I may bump that down to 2 or 2.5 stars because I just didn't love it very much. It was just kind of there, and I didn't really care about it. So I'm glad it was short. It was fairly easy to get through, but just wasn't really feeling this one this month. So it'll stay on my shelf for now with my Dickens collection, but we'll see how long it stays there. It just wasn't my favorite. So that one was 3, maybe 2 stars. Every other book on my list for this month was at least 4 stars, between 4 and 5 stars. So it was a fabulous month. So like I said, I'm doing these in the order that I liked them, but literally every single book from this point out, I thoroughly enjoyed. So even though the next one is lower on my list than others, I didn't dislike it. It's just there were so many other fantastic ones I read that I liked so much more. The next book that I finished in August was Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I listened to the majority of this one on audio because I had heard that this one is really good on audio, and it absolutely was. This book follows a rock band in the 70s as they're starting out, as they're making music, as they're writing albums, and different musical artists working together and things like that. And it's really enjoyable. The unique thing about this book is that it is written in interview form. The entire book is written as an interview. Every single page is like this, where you have the characters and then what they're saying in the interview, and that's the entire book. So the setup and the writing for this book was very good and done very, very well. The quality of the audiobook was absolutely fantastic because there is a different voice actor for every single character in the book, which really made it feel like you were getting so many different perspectives. And so I am so glad that I listened to this on audio. I had it on my shelf already, but I'm very, very glad that I listened to the audiobook for this one. I only actually physically read maybe the last 30 pages or so, just because either my audiobook had to go back to the library, or I just really wanted to get to the end of it. I can't really remember. So I did physically read the very end of this book, but the majority of it I listened to on audio, and I really, really liked it. As you might guess, this is a very, very character-heavy story. The plot is mostly just completely focused on the characters and their development and how they work together in their relationships. So this is a very character-heavy book. And while the character development was really, really good in this one, it was just a little bit hard for me to personally connect with the characters. A big focus on this book is the flaws of those characters and the mistakes that they make. And so while that development was done very well, sometimes I feel like they were almost so flawed that it was kind of hard for me to connect with them and stuff like that, because all you're seeing is just all the mistakes that they're making. So that was kind of my response to this book. It was good, it was well written, the character development was there, it was on point, but it was just a little bit harder for me to personally connect with this one. There's also a twist at the end, which I had heard was kind of surprising, and while I wasn't necessarily expecting it, I also didn't think it was the world's most mind-blowing twist at all. I didn't expect it, which was cool, but I also didn't really find myself like thinking about it and being wowed by it all the time. So the twist was there, it was interesting, but it honestly didn't, for me, have much bearing on the story as a whole. It was just kind of an interesting thing that was thrown in at the end. So it was okay. The twist at the end was okay, but it wasn't amazing. I rated this one 4 stars. Like I said, the writing was great. This is my first Taylor Jenkins read that I've ever read, and it is intriguing enough for me to want to pick up another one of her books. I'm not sure which one. Taylor Jenkins Reid writes fictional stories about fictional celebrities. And so this one focuses on a rock band. She has others that focus on athletes or old Hollywood. So I'm not really sure which one I would pick up next. I'm not necessarily in a rush to pick up another one by her, but I'm intrigued enough to want to at some point. Also, I can't remember if I already said, but I gave this one 4 stars. I also, pretty much right after I finished this one, started watching the show on, I think it's Amazon Prime, that they made of this book. And I have maybe 3 or 4 episodes into the show, and I was kind of underwhelmed. So I stopped watching the show. First of all, it was exactly like the book as far as like plot goes and stuff like that. Like they stuck to the book, which is great, at least as far as I got, which is great. But having just gone through and read the whole plot, I wasn't really engaged in the show because I wasn't like, oh, what's going to happen? Because I already know what was going to happen because I literally just finished this. Also, this book is very, very gritty. It is set in the rock scene. There is a heavy, heavy, heavy emphasis on drugs and alcohol and the impact that those have on the characters' lives. And while that was mentioned and was an aspect of the show, I feel like it wasn't as heavy and gritty as it was in the book, which is one of the things that I really enjoyed about the book was how raw it was about that. And I feel like the show didn't show that side as much, at least not as far as I got. It totally might later on, but maybe I'll go back and watch the rest of it at some point later. I don't know, probably not. Next on my list for August is Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. I had fun with this one. This one was definitely a book that I had fun with. It was not an amazing book as far as quality goes at all, but I had a lot of fun with it. This one is wildly popular on TikTok right now, and I was very happy when I managed to find a copy at my Costco because they were sold out everywhere when I was looking for it. I was happy to get my hands on it and read it, and this one was just fun. This is a fantasy romance that centers on a war college, and the main character in this one, Violet, is part of the Dragon Rider Quadrant, even though she doesn't really plan on going there, and she's very unsure of herself at the beginning of this book. So there is a lot of development with her character in this one, which I kind of enjoyed. It was not amazing character development by any means, but I enjoyed seeing her character's journey throughout this book. The best way to sum up this book is it's basically Divergent with dragons. The characters in this book are all close to 20 to 22-ish in age, and they are in the Dragon Rider school learning how to fight and become warriors. There's been a war going on in this country for like 300 years or so, and so they're training to become Dragon Riders to get involved in that. This is also quite romance heavy, and it was fun. This was one that I went into already planning to not take seriously, and I'm glad that I did. If I had chosen to take this seriously, I would not have enjoyed it at all. The writing is not phenomenal. The world building is not great. But it's a fun story. It was a fun one to read, and I am looking forward to the next one, which comes out in November, I think. I believe it's called Iron Flame, and that one comes out in November, and I will be reading the second one. I gave this one 4 stars. It was fun. It was a good time, but it definitely wasn't one to take seriously, but I still enjoyed it anyway. All right, we're getting into the really good ones now. The next one that I read in August was Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross, and I loved this one. This is a young adult fantasy romance, and it was so good. I loved this one so much. The plot at the beginning of this one is basically the fantasy version of that old movie You've Got Mail, where 2 characters are exchanging emails with each other and making friends with each other through email, but in real life they're like enemies and rivals. And this is the same type of thing. The main characters in this one are rival journalists at a newspaper, and they end up writing to each other through magical typewriters. They both have 2 out of 3 very rare typewriters that were made, and they realize that when they're writing on their typewriters, they are able to send messages to each other through that. So that's kind of how the book starts out, but then it very quickly develops from there. This book was much, much more emotional than I was anticipating. I was not expecting it to be as touching and emotional as it was. When I heard about it, when I heard kind of that general plot device that I was talking about earlier with the magical typewriters and then talking to each other, enemies to lovers, all of this, I was like, okay, it sounds fun, but that's not even really what this book was about. This book was about war and loss and grief, and amongst all of that, it was so surprisingly gentle. There was a gentle energy running through this book that was honestly just heartbreaking. It was so good. First of all, the writing is beautiful. This is the first book I have ever read by Rebecca Ross. I own A River Enchanted, but I haven't read that one yet, but I am very much wanting to now because I really like her writing after this one. It was very, very good. The storytelling was great. I felt so connected to the characters. And another thing about the characters was both Iris and Roman, who were the 2 main characters, both of them were just genuinely nice people, which was honestly kind of refreshing. I love a morally gray fantasy character as much as the next one, but having 2 just gentle and kind main characters was honestly so lovely. But at the same time, they were very strong characters at the same time. Like, they knew what they wanted and they were gonna go for it, but it was so gentle at the same time. I can't even hardly describe it. It was just so good. The writing, like I said, was beautiful in this one. I gave this one 4 stars after I finished it, but honestly, the more that I think about it afterwards, I'm probably gonna bump that up to 4.5. My only complaint about this one is that the pacing I felt was just a teeny tiny bit slow. There were a few times, especially near the beginning of the book, where I was really enjoying it while I was reading it, but then once I had to put it down, like I had to remind myself to pick it back up. It wasn't one that I was like, oh my gosh, I have to go read this. It was one that I had to remind myself to pick back up a few times. But then the second half of the book was just very, very engaging. So the only reason this isn't a 5-star for me is because the pacing I felt was just a little tiny bit slow and it didn't quite hold my interest the way that I was hoping. But I think I'm gonna bump this one up to 4.5 stars though, because it was amazing. I loved it so much. Some of the quotes in this book are so beautiful. I'm going to try to put a few of them up on the screen while I read them, but I just want to give you guys an idea of how pretty the writing is in this one. I have adjusted, like taken out a little tiny bit of some of these quotes to not give too many spoilers, but just be warned, there could possibly be some teeny tiny spoilers with these quotes that I'm going to give, particularly the last one. But I have tried to make this as spoiler free as possible while still sharing some of the beautiful writing that's in this book. The first quote I have is from one of the letters that Iris and Roman are writing to each other, and it says, "I think we all wear armor. I think those who don't are fools, risking the pain of being wounded by the sharp edges of the world over and over again. But if I've learned anything from these fools, it's that to be vulnerable is a strength most of us fear. It takes courage to let down your armor, to welcome people to see you as you are. Sometimes I feel the same as you. I can't risk having people behold me as I truly am. But there's also a small voice in the back of my mind, a voice that tells me you will miss so much by being guarded. This next quote is from a conversation between two characters. I don't deserve to be this happy, not when there's so much pain and terror and loss in the world. Why would you say that? Do you think we could live in a world made of only these things? Death and pain and horror, loss and agony? It's not a crime to feel joy, even when things seem hopeless. You deserve all the happiness in the world, and I intend to see that you have it. And then this last quote I have is some wedding vows that are present in this book, and they are just some of the most gorgeous things that I have ever read. Like, I have heard several different fictional wedding vows before that I have read, and this one was honestly just one of the sweetest, and I almost started crying again looking this quote back up to prep for this video. I pray that my days will be long at your side. Let me feel and satisfy every longing in your soul. May your hand be in mine by sun and by night. Let our breaths twine and our blood become one until our bones turn to dust. Even then, may I find your soul still sworn to mine. So this book is just so gorgeous, so heartfelt. Highly recommend. There is going to be a second one that comes out in, I believe, December, I think it's literally the day after Christmas that the second one comes out. And I believe that will be the end of this. I think this is just a duology. And so I am very excited because the ending of this one, oh my gosh, I was not at all anticipating anything that happened at the end. I was crying for the last 50 pages of the book, probably. It's so good. Oh, something else that I forgot to mention about this book was that I absolutely loved the in-world mythology that was built into this. It was very, very mythology heavy. The war that is going on is a war between two gods, and it is so good. I loved every piece of this world's mythology that it gave to us. It was just gorgeous. Another book that I listened to on audio is These Violent Delights by Micah Nemerever. Oh my gosh, this book was so intense. It was amazing. I have seen this one often categorized kind of as dark academia, and it kind of was a little bit in the sense that the two main characters, they're both in college, they're very smart. A lot of it is set in like their college dorm and stuff like that, but honestly, and there are a lot of philosophical questions that are brought up, but honestly this one leads, I feel, far more heavily on the thriller side of dark academia than the actual like academic part of it. This one was so intense. I loved it so much. So this one follows two boys, Paul and Julian, and their crazy toxic relationship that eventually devolves its way into a murder. And it was so good. I could not believe the writing in this book. Since I listened to it on audio, I didn't really get the chance to pull quotes from it because I was listening to it, so I couldn't stop and like highlight or tab or anything like that, because I'm driving while I'm listening to audiobooks, so I didn't really get to write down anything. But the writing in this book was stunning. It was raw and gripping in a way that I have not read in a long time. One of the things that I absolutely loved about this book was the way that it did not at all romanticize anything about these characters. They are straight up toxic, and it leaned all into that. It did not pretend to be beautiful at all. It was so raw, and like I keep using that word, but like I don't know how else to describe it. It was so good. The story is mostly, if not all, told from Paul's point of view, and I loved having a POV that was coming from a very twisted headspace from an extremely unreliable narrator, and it was so good. it's kind of hard to talk about without spoiling it. But the way the relationship and the dynamics unfolded, and just the way that every single thing was portrayed up to how it ended, like, it ended exactly the way I wanted to. And it was dark. It was a very dark ending, but it ended exactly the way I wanted it to. Like, the whole time, probably the last third-ish of the book, I was sitting there and I was listening to it and I was like, oh, I really, really, really hope that the ending goes this one specific way, and it did, and I am so happy that it did. Not that it was a happy ending, but I wanted that in the ending, and it gave me exactly what I was hoping that it would give, and it was just so good. I could not believe how much I liked this one. The next two books I have were my 2 5-star reads, and I don't have them physically with me because they were from the library, and one of them was an audiobook, but I loved these so much. So the first one is Vicious by V.E. Schwab. I'll put it up on the screen somewhere. But I love this one. I am on a V.E. Schwab kick right now. I read her Shades of Magic series a couple months ago, and then I am currently in the middle of the Villains duology, which Vicious is the first book of. So I read Vicious in August. I have already started Vengeful, which is the second one, but I haven't finished it yet, so I'll talk about that one later. But Vicious was so good. This one follows two characters, Victor and Eli, and at the beginning of the book, it is their research about what is called in this book extraordinaries. It's basically superheroes. It's people with superhuman powers, and they're researching it and trying to figure out. Vicious was one of the best dual timeline books that I have ever read. Dual timeline is very hit or miss for me, and I thought that Vicious did it so well. The two timelines in the book are in the past, 10 years in the past, when Victor and Eli were roommates in college when they started doing their research about this project. And then it is the present day in the book where Victor has just gotten out of jail. He has not seen Eli in almost 10 years, and he is fighting to get back to him to get revenge for some things that happened earlier on in the book. And it is so good. The system of these superhuman powers in this book is based on people having near-death experiences. So people basically dying to the point where they're dead for a couple minutes, but then managing to be revived. And the powers that people get are based on what that experience was and what their thoughts and emotions were in those moments. And so it's a very, very intriguing premise of seeing how far you can push that, because at the beginning they're doing research on this and they're trying to do this on purpose, and then it unfolds into a lot more later where they find other people who are EOs, as the book calls them, extraordinaries. And it's such an intriguing system that I was hooked immediately. It was so cool. So like I said, the series is called Villains. It's a duology, and that was one of the super cool things about this book, was the fact that you have not even morally gray characters, just two straight up bad dudes, honestly, who are so heavily convinced. Each of them is so convinced that they are the one in the right. Like, they believe it with their entire being that they are the one in the right, and what they will do to protect themselves and all of that and how that unfolds. It was so good. I absolutely loved every single part of it. It was so good. I'm in the middle of the second book right now. I can't wait to finish it. It is amazing. I love Schwab's writing and her characters just so much. The final book that I read in August was some of the most hard-hitting writing that I have read in quite some time. I listened to about half of this one on audio and got just so invested and wanted to read it faster than the audiobook could read it to me that I ended up getting the ebook from my library also. And that was In the Lives of Puppets by TJ Klune. This was the first book that I have ever read by TJ Klune, and now I want to read everything that he has ever written. I hope so much that his other books are on par with this one, because my jaw was on the floor. This book is a science fiction retelling of Pinocchio and the Pinocchio story, where the Pinocchio character, his name's not Pinocchio, but the Pinocchio character is the only human in his life. Everything that he has grown up with around him is robots. And so that was super interesting, I thought, where you have the Pinocchio retelling where the Pinocchio character is the only human. His name is Victor. I thought that that was just so cool. I could not believe what this book turned into, because when it first started, it was kind of fun and quirky, and I was like, oh, this is cute, this is fun. And then as the book went, it just turned into this, it was mind-blowing to me. And like, honestly, looking back, it's not the most mind-blowing book in the world, but like I said, my jaw was on the floor. It was so good. I ate this one up so fast, cried so hard. I cried so hard. This one was just phenomenal. The storytelling in this book was amazing. There was so much that happened that honestly I probably should have seen coming, especially since like I already know the Pinocchio story. So that was one of the things that made me laugh about it. And I'm like this, I tend to kind of space out, and when I'm reading a book that I'm just reading for pure enjoyment, I don't really sit and analyze it too much while I'm reading it. I just kind of am along for the ride and want it to surprise me. So even in stories like this that are retellings where I know the story that it's based off of, and then something will happen in the story that's literally exactly like what happens in the original story, I'm like, oh, no, like I was shocked, and which made me laugh so hard because things kept happening, and I was like, oh, no, and I was like, oh, of course that happened, I should have known. But anyway, the storytelling was so good in this one, and like I said, it started out just kind of cute and fun, and I was like, oh, this is fun, and then it wrecked me so much more than I ever could have anticipated. I have not stopped thinking about this book since I finished it a couple weeks ago. I have not stopped thinking about it. I have several quotes that I pulled from this one. My whole phone was just full of screenshots from the ebook of quotes that were just so good. So I'm gonna put a bunch of them up on the screen. Again, I have adjusted, tweaked some of these just slightly, like just taken some characters' names out and stuff to not give spoilers. But these quotes are just so good. What is the nature of forgiveness? Meaning, what must one do in order to forgive? Second, who has standing to forgive? Is it just those affected, or does it include someone capable of forgiving, even if they did not suffer as others had? And last, when is forgiveness morally good, right, and praiseworthy? Our only flaw is that we've condemned ourselves to spend eternity mimicking that which we deemed unfit to exist. We can never be you. Instead, we became your ghosts and will haunt this world until there is nothing left. I thought he was my atonement, that I could somehow create a bit of beauty in all this decay. And he is, you know, beautiful. There has never been anything like him in all the world. But I also never knew grief before him. Grief that I could create something so fragile from the ashes of the fire I'd set. Vice is universal, no matter what we're made of. Am I like them? No, she said. You are human. What if that's worse? How can I exist when I have no one to exist with? He asked. How can I know I'm real if there is nothing to compare it to? I just can't with this book. It was so good. I so cannot wait to read more of TJ Klune's books, and I hope so much that they hit as hard as this one did, because I need this one in my life. Like I said, I got the audiobook and the ebook from the library, so I don't own this one, and this one is like on the top of my list of books to buy, just to have on my shelf to treasure, because I loved this one so much. So anyway, that was all of the books that I read in August. Again, this was one of the best reading months I have had this entire year. It was so good. I am hoping and praying that September is just as good, because these books were phenomenal, wrecked me in so many ways that I did not anticipate. It was just so good. Thank you so much for watching. I would love to hear in the comments what your favorite book of the month of August was. So please tell me down below, and I will see you next time. Bye.